We would like to welcome our expert one, Tania Domi, who is a human rights expert from Columbia University. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Well, given these shocking reports, is it fair to say that sexual violence is consciously and deliberately used as a part of Russian war machinery?
Notwithstanding the current reports, from day one, Russia has sought to use rape and sexual violence as a weapon of war. It actually began during the annexation of Crimea in 2014. The ICC prosecutor actually drew up charges, and then when the war resumed in 2022, the prosecutor also expanded his investigation. And from day one, when the war began, it reestablished itself in 2022, there were reports by local media in the first week of the war that rapes were taking place. And there's approximately over 250 rapes already identified by the state prosecutor in Ukraine. And I would anticipate that's actually low. It's a low figure because many victims do not come forward. There may be, and also investigations are underway. But the fact that these reports indicate that men are being disproportionately raped also is not surprising. As a matter of fact, during the Bosnian War, which established landmark decisions under international criminal law, the first rape conviction in the Bosnian War was of a man who ordered the rapes of other men, and his name was Duško Tadić. So I would anticipate that women, men, and including children are being sexually assaulted by the Russian troops.
And now you mentioned something that is, surprising to us. You just said that men being the majority of the victim is actually not surprising. That kind of goes against the general kind of idea of a rape. How is that?
Well, I don't think that many people presume that men are raped. They always see women as victims, but men are raped, and many times they're raped using implements like batons, electrical stimulation. They've described in the CNN report that they've been using field radio wires and attaching them to their genitalia and shocking them. That is torture, but under international criminal law, rape itself is a crime, and it is considered torture. And if it is determined by the state prosecutor in Ukraine, who's already the state prosecutor and the ICC prosecutor, if they determine that this is widespread and systematic, we're talking about atrocity crimes, crimes against humanity. And it's carried out to humiliate and to use power over people. And the other aspect to this is that the longer there's an occupation, the longer that Russian troops detain and imprison Ukrainians, I would anticipate that sexual violence will continue, if not escalate.
Well, given that rape, and especially rape on males, is notoriously underreported, and males prefer to talk about torture rather than to admit to rape, how can we help those victims to bring to light, because as you said, it's 250 rapes that are documented. We can imagine that the number is way, way greater, with an atmosphere of sort of a more open admission that is happening. How can we help the victims?
It's a very long process of recovery. Even to this day, 30 years later in Bosnia, male victims of rape is really a taboo subject. It is not discussed publicly. There are very few men that have come forward in Bosnia that would admit they were raped. And it's a psychosocial process. People work with therapists, and for people to be able to testify, they would also be prepared to testify through work with therapists as well. It's about shame, and it's about people just feeling that they have been humiliated, and therefore they self-silence themselves. But I argue that the stigma of rape actually is enforced through silence. So to encourage people to come forward and be able to talk about it in a safe space, but that takes a long time. And the war isn't even over yet. So we're at the very, very beginning of how people will even be able to anticipate how to recover. But it is a psychosocial process indeed.
And like you mentioned, the war is not even over yet. And of course, if this is allowed to happen, this will keep happening. Is there anything that the international community can come together and achieve to deter somewhat of these actions taking place?
I would like to see more international engagement on this issue and speak about it from podiums, from Brussels to Washington to London. In general, there's a silence around this crime, and it is absolutely horrific what is happening to people, because remember, the victim themselves, the survivor themselves, will never get over this. This experience will be with them for the rest of their lives, and therefore I think it's incumbent that the prosecutor and other leaders in the European Union should be condemning these crimes harshly. This is unacceptable. This is the 21st century, and the wars that we're seeing take place, including the Middle East war, what has happened also in Israel is an example on October 7th, where many people were raped and murdered. So this isn't dissipating. I see actually an explosion of conflict-related sexual violence throughout the world, rather. Ethiopia is another example where it is notable for gang rape. And no one is really talking about this. And I think it's very important that governments and leaders speak out in condemnation.
Well, how important is that for the world to understand that what is happening in Ukraine is not just a random act of sexual violence, but an orchestrated by Russia, by, for instance, supplying Viagra to the troops, and orchestrated actions that supports and promotes rape? How important is for the world to take the veil of that heinous crime?
I think it's really, really important. The Viagra rumor began early in the war, and I know initially the UN did not verify it, but the UN plays a critical role here. Pramila Patten has worked with Ukraine on enabling and helping with the investigations by the state prosecutor. I mean, there's a lot of legal aspects to addressing this crime, but seriously, I think Vladimir Putin should be condemned from London to Tokyo for these crimes and the way he's carried it out. And there's command responsibility, and I believe that the state prosecutors already indicted Putin for the deportation of children, but Putin should also be, and the leaders of the Russian army should be indicted for rape.
Absolutely.
And conflict-related sexual violence.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Domi, for explaining of this really, really painful chapter of this horrendous conflict.